All right, we are straight up 9 o'clock. So welcome everyone to this first of what may become a regular opportunity, depending on what happens in the Colorado General Assembly in any given legislative year. I'm Mary Medley, CEO of the Colorado Society of CPAs, and I'm delighted to be with you today to talk about what it's all about behind the scenes, Advocacy 101. Senate Bill 22-233, the Colorado dividend or advance TABOR refund legislation, depending on how you like to think about it. So know that our purpose today is to review how this all came together, what we know now in response to a lot of questions that have been asked along the way, and to give you a glimpse at how the process itself works. Some of you I know have been involved in legislative activity over the years, so this may be a little bit of a repeat for you. Thank you for being patient with me as well. I have looked at the questions that were sent in on the Google form in advance of today, so I do have answers to most of them, and we will get answers to any question that we can't answer today. In addition, yes, we will send you the slides in PDF format after the program. And know that there will be a more extensive article about Senate Bill 233 in the May-June issue of News Account, which, yes, is still in production because we held it to be able to be completely up to date on this particular legislation. It will show up in your mailbox or your inbox eventually, but not yet. All right, with that, let's go ahead and move to the timeline. Know that what I am giving you here is, oops, sorry, Tiffany. Thank you for going back, if you would, to the quote slide. I'm sure some of you have heard versions of this in the past, and it is usually attributed to Otto von Bismarck. But in fact, John Godfrey Sachs said, "Laws, like sausages, cease to inspire respect in proportion as we know how they are made." And this particular bill definitely was sausage making at its most, grinding, chopping, squishing into a casing and produced for consumption. So now to the timeline. I will embellish what I'm showing you here on the screen as we go along because I didn't want to make you read a whole bunch of slides. Just know that a lot was going on behind the scenes, but not very much at some points along the way. So this all began on April 25 when Governor Polis held a press conference, essentially, initially, to tell Colorado citizens about all the terrific things that had happened in the legislature thus far. Remember, the session began back in early January, and it is limited statutorily by the Constitution to 120 days. So it typically begins on the first Wednesday in January after New Year's. That adjusts depending on when January 1 falls and ends 120 days later. The COVID year being the exception because, of course, the Capitol was not open for a lot of that time. So this was a more typical year, although atypical in lots of other ways. And the governor actually went out to the public and said, these are all the great things we are doing, and you're going to get, if you're an individual, $400 by the summer, because we know that gas prices have gone up, home costs, food costs, inflation have all gone up, and Colorado citizens need their money now. And of course, $800 if filing jointly. There was no bill. It was a promise the governor made, and in his press conference he said, a bill will be introduced to take care of all this. And oh, by the way, it will take care of everyone who has filed a return by May 31. As you can imagine, things blew up everywhere because, of course, there were lots and lots of people who were unable to file by the filing deadline, the typical one, April 18, much less by May 31, essentially for the same reasons. They didn't have all their information. or they were out of the country, or for one reason or another, they were working with a tax preparer who needed to extend the return. And so, of course, we immediately started talking with people in the governor's office behind the scenes to find out what was really intended. But we couldn't do anything until the bill was actually introduced. And that happened 2 days later, very late at night on April 27. Senate Bill 22-233 was introduced and sponsored by Senators Nick Hinrichsen and Robert Rodriguez, both Democrats. The next day, the very next morning, April 28, I was busily sitting here at my computer working on an email alert to all COCPA members, asking for two really important outreach communications. One, to please send emails to members of the Senate Finance Committee, because we knew that's where the bill would be heard initially. And also to let me know if anyone were willing to testify during the hearing. We didn't know when it would be, but we did know what we were going to be asking for. Next slide. So we had four things on our list. Extend the May 31st deadline. We wanted it to go all the way to October 17. However, it was really clear that that wasn't going to happen initially, and I'll tell you more about that in a moment. We definitely wanted taxpayers to be able to file by October 17 and still receive the TABOR refund. It was really important as well, in my view, to include a hold harmless provision for tax preparers, because we'd already begun hearing from members of the society, hey, what if I can't get it done by that earlier date? And my client wants me to pay the $400 or the $800. What if my client sues me because I can't get the return prepared? What if my team is all on vacation now because we've survived through the April 18 deadline and I don't have people? All of those concerns were obviously important to address. And then because we didn't know what the expectation would be around all of that filing deadline complexity, could there be a TABOR refund claim form or an intent to file form that taxpayers or their preparers could download from Revenue Online to indicate an intention to file or having already filed an extension and therefore be allowed to receive the TABOR refund? Those were the four things that we asked members to communicate to members of the Senate Finance Committee. Next slide. So roll forward to the very next day, and the bill has been scheduled in the Senate Finance Committee upon adjournment. What that meant was the Senate was going to be on the floor in the morning, beginning at 9 a.m., to do all the work that it already had in play. Second readings of bills, third readings of bills, consideration of House bills that had been referred already, and therefore, upon adjournment could be any time. I immediately sent out an email message to those individuals who had said, yes, I'll testify. There were about 10 people who raised their hand virtually and said, I can do this. And by the way, could do it virtually. That is now available to all citizens of Colorado as a result of some changes that were made during the COVID legislative session when people couldn't go to the Capitol. It also makes it much more convenient, as you can imagine, when you're not sure exactly what time that particular bill will be heard by a committee. So reached out, had several people who were willing to go ahead and say yes. Some of them obviously were still available and some of them were not because it was such a quick turn. We ended up having 6. And I knew that I would be going down to the Capitol to testify in person. You have the ability, by the way, to watch and listen to activity of any committee as well as both the Senate and the House when the legislature is in session. You can go to the Colorado General Assembly website, and look for the watch and listen tab, and you can find whatever it is you'd like to observe. So literally, I sat here in the society office until I heard we're about to adjourn. Got in the society vehicle and headed to the Capitol. The bill was scheduled for being fourth on the agenda, which gave us a little bit of time to let everybody else know who had said, yes, I will sign up to testify virtually. So we roll into the Capitol, and of course, there is a lot of buzz about this bill. I'm outside of the old Supreme Court chambers where I see Brendan Reese, the deputy in taxpayer services for the Colorado Department of Revenue, along with Cooper Reveille, the lobbyist for the Department of Revenue, our legislative counsel, Daniel Furman, and the CEO for the Colorado Chamber of Commerce, Lauren Furman, all of whom have been working this bill night and day ever since we finally had legislation. And remember, that was only 2 nights before. So I learned before walking into the hearing that the bill sponsors understand the issue around the extension. And they are going to deal with it, but not yet. They have, however, already had legislative drafting develop 2 amendments, one to push the May 31 deadline out to June 30. And I'll tell you more about why just 30 more days in a moment. And the second, the hold harmless provision that we had asked for. So why not go all the way to October 17 instead of another incremental 30-day extension of the deadline? The department didn't know this was coming. The governor literally went to the department and said, how much money do you think we're going to have to refund? And what does that mean for refunding to all Colorado citizens who qualify? And that's where the $400, $800 numbers came from. It was not exact because the actual amount of excess revenues won't even be known until after the end of the fiscal year for the state on June 30 of 2022. Keep in mind that this was all about refunding early the amount that would be necessary to refund under the Tabor constitutional amendment for the entire year, July 1, 2021 through June 30, 2022. But of course, on April 25th, no one knew how much that is. No one knows today how much that is. The state certifies that amount by September 30 of this year. And the Department of Revenue essentially moves on that as of October 1. This is true in every year. So there was no way to know the exact amount. And keep in mind, it is an election year. The governor is up for re-election. The initial goal, and no one has said this in print, this is Mary's view. So official disclaimer right here. Mary thinks, and no one has confirmed it, that the governor went to the department, said how much. The department did the math it could do based on the forecasts available, said 400 and 800. And the governor said, I want the money in people's hands before the election. And that's why the May 31 deadline initially. It is also why they would not push it out beyond June 30, much less all the way to October, because they don't know how much. And they won't for quite a while. But it needed to have that kind of short time frame so that it could all be paid out before the election. And remember, Colorado is a mail ballot state for voting. So those mail ballots usually drop the first week in October, which meant late summer needed to be when those checks came. So we get into the committee hearing. Our folks testify virtually. I testify. And by this time, we have stepped away from that fourth ask because we already know The hold harmless amendment is going to be offered up, and the extension to June 30 is going to be offered up as well. The bill sponsors have indicated informally and then in the hearing on the record that they will deal with a separate amendment on second reading on the Senate floor to take care of the October 17 filing deadline. Why they couldn't do it immediately in that hearing was because there are some complexities in figuring out how to accomplish that. And they needed time to work with the Department of Revenue and with legislative drafting. That's also the reason why, for those of you who asked about it or wondered about it, the amendment language itself was a little bit unusual. It spoke directly to having filed a federal extension, when you know that Colorado has an automatic 6-month extension available to any taxpayer without having to file anything. So I'll come back to that in a moment as well. On the record, in addition, 2 really important things happened. Every single member of the Senate Finance Committee commented on how many CPAs reached out about the problems inherent with 233 as it was introduced. Your voices made this work the way it should have. Your voices and your communication not only was received, but also listened to, and you, every single one of you who participated in that, either by talking about it or communicating directly with legislators, can feel terrific about having made excellent public policy the result. I'll say it again later. You, CPAs in Colorado, made the difference. So, Senate Finance Committee hears the bill. The 2 amendments I mentioned are added to the bill. It goes to the Senate floor. And on May 2nd, the bill is also amended to take care of the extension to October 17. Understanding that people who have filed by June 30 will get their money by the end of the summer, and people who file by October 17, according to the legislative language in the bill, will receive their funds somewhere around January 2023. So yes, they'll have to wait, but that's primarily because the process itself has to be undertaken. And as you can imagine, the department isn't going to be able to issue those refund checks for people who haven't filed yet. May 3rd, the bill passes on 3rd reading, and the Senate refers it to House Finance. 2 days go by, and the House Finance Committee hears and passes the bill on to House Appropriations. Every bill that has some sort of financial impact to the state goes through both houses' appropriations committees. So it went into Senate Appropriations, but there was nothing done there. That was perfunctory. Now it goes to the House Appropriations Committee so that dollars can be taken care of for giving the money the Department of Revenue and the Department of Personnel need to be able to do the programming, process the checks, and actually get the work accomplished so that all those qualified Colorado citizens will receive their money. Next slide. Very fast now we are moving in some ways. The House passes the bill on 2nd reading on the 5th, that same day that it has been heard, it has been amended, and it has been referred to the full House. And then, of course, we have May 6th, which is a Friday, and there is a huge agenda for the House to be going through. The bill's actually on the agenda for 3rd reading, but it doesn't happen. They finally adjourn, and yes, I was listening, watch and listen, at about 11:55 on Friday night, and agree that they're not going to work the weekend. It was Mother's Day weekend, remember? So roll forward to Monday, May 9, the House amends the bill on 3rd reading and That's because the Democrats have figured out that, hey, we based that original $400, $800 amount on the numbers that we had at the time. Those numbers could change by the time we get to the end of the state fiscal year on June 30. So let's put into the bill the requirement that the amount be recalculated. It could go up. It also could go down. So just keep that in mind. You might see a $300 check. You might see a $500 check. You might see a $400 check. You might see some other number in that check once the state has the opportunity to recalculate how much per taxpayer will be paid. The other thing to remember about this, it was a temporary mechanism added to the array of choices available for handling the refund according to the Tabor constitutional amendment. A lot of those have been in place for a long time. And we will talk a little bit later about the sales tax refund on the tax return. Some of you will remember that the tax rate itself was actually reduced from 4.55 to 4.5 this time around also. Those two, the phased tax refund opportunity depending on income on the return, and the reduction in the state sales tax, as well as the reduction in the tax rate overall, are typically used when there is a Tabor refund year. But sometimes, last time being in 2015, sometimes it's a flat amount per taxpayer. And in that year, you got a $15 check if you were a single taxpayer, and you got a $30 check if you were married filing jointly. So the bill is amended in the House on third reading. That means it has to go back to the Senate for concurrence, because whenever a bill is amended after the first House has heard it, or the first chamber, if you will, has heard it, then it has to go back to be either agreed on or negotiated. On May 10, the Senate concurs and repasses the bill. Remember, I said May 11 is when the legislature had to adjourn by midnight. So at roughly 11:56 on May 10, the Senate concurred and repassed the bill. On May 11, it was sent to Governor Polis for signature. I did check early this morning. The document has been prepared, and you may be aware the governor is on a state signing tour right now, crossing the geography of Colorado to sign particular groups of bills. This will be signed, it will go into effect, and it will take care of every qualified taxpayer who is eligible to receive the refund. Next slide. Okay, so what's a qualified individual? You have to have lived in Colorado January 1 through December 31 of 2021. And you have to file by June 30, 22 or October 17, 22, a Colorado income tax return for 2021, or receive the property tax, rent, or heat credit rebate. And you have to be at least 18 years old on December 31, 2021. Note here, dependents are not eligible for the Tabor refund. That's part of the original statutory requirements. So no, if you've got a taxpayer who wants to know if his son or daughter is still in college, who's still on the family payroll, will get the $400, the answer is no. Next slide. What about all those people with no taxable income and therefore they didn't file? If you file either by June 30 or October 17, you have to do so to be eligible. Income, even if not taxed, needs to show on the return. You can't just file an all zeros return. It will be considered fraudulent and it will be essentially ignored. I know that's not a great answer for some of the people that you know about. That has been raised both with the legislature and with the Department of Revenue. Remember, the department doesn't make this decision. The department complies with the statutory requirements. So you can vent to me. I'm happy to listen, but that's not going to change. Next slide. So I'll come back to this in a moment. I just want to remind you that the CPA PAC, the CPA Political Action Committee, and the new 1904 Small Donor Fund, which was just formed this past year, are huge opportunities for Colorado CPAs to participate in the legislative process through financial support of Colorado legislative candidates only. CPA PAC does not contribute to governor's race, secretary of state, treasurer, or nationally either. This is a state PAC only for candidates running for state legislative office. And there are limitations, $625 per person per 2-year election cycle, and we're in the second year of the cycle now. And the small donor fund is limited to $50 annually. It's a really simple and low-cost way for people to participate in the process. You see here on the slide, and as I mentioned, you'll receive these slides, where you can send your check. Pam Feely, CPA, Colorado Society of CPAs member, is treasurer of both these groups. And so that's the reason why you can mail your check to her. Okay, let's go to, thank you, Tiffany. Here are the links to see for the bill as it was passed. You can also listen to the recording of that Senate Finance Committee hearing. And if you have a few minutes, because it's not very long, I encourage you to check it out, because a couple of really cool things happened during that hearing. Not only do you get to hear your colleagues testify virtually, and you get to hear me again, but also you have the opportunity to hear both the chair of the committee, Senator Julie Gonzalez, and one of the members, Senator Pete Lee from Colorado Springs, talk about the impact of the communication CPAs sent to committee members. Both of them were highly complimentary and a little bit amused, frankly. They commented about how they had gotten many, many, many emails from CPAs explaining the problems associated with 233 only allowing for people who had filed by May 31 to receive the TABOR refund. They got it. And that is really unusual. I've been doing this work for several decades now. I have never heard legislators say thank you for reaching out and telling us why this matters. In fact, Senator Lee went on quite expansively about how quickly CPAs responded, how quickly they had the information they needed, and because of the urgency and the timing of when the bill was introduced, remember, we're talking April 27 to May 10 for it to get done, with a weekend in there. Actually, 2 weekends, right? The impact was huge. You made good public policy happen. Okay, I know that the chat has been burning up. So yes, Tiffany, please go to the next one. I quote Aaron Silverstein, who's the senior legislative aide to a member of the Colorado General Assembly. It was a long quote. I just gave you a little piece, but he makes the point. It was a really good example of transparent lawmaking, public comment, and responsive legislators. And the encouragement, of course, get involved and read the bills and comment. You really can, as even one person, but certainly as a whole lot of people, make a difference in how these things actually play out. Okay, so lots and lots of questions. I'm going to go to the several that were in the Google sheet that we provided in advance to give you the answers to those first. And Tiffany, if you'll go to the next slide, and then the one after that. I know this is really, really tiny, but the first question, how will refunds be sent via USPS check? Best practice to change address if the taxpayer has moved. via direct deposit. Best practice to change if most recent account used has changed. Here's the answer. The department will send the refund to the last known address as identified on the 2021 return. A taxpayer can change address in two ways. If you have a Revenue Online account, the change of address can be done online, and if not, you can file the form that's shown here on the slide. And remember, you'll get these so you'll have that little address. The refunds will not be done by direct deposit, so there will be an actual check. And remember, depending on when the return is filed, it will either come in late summer or early next year. Okay? Now, second question in the Google form, taxpayers must file a 2021 Colorado return to receive this refund. Will CDOR have a free portal to file zero returns for those taxpayers due to low income or only Social Security benefits and who are not required to file a return? Have a way to do that? The answer is no. If it's a completely zero return, there is no TABOR refund coming. I know that's not the answer that you'd like to hear, but it is the answer. Okay, for 2021, I have a client who filed after April 18. No Colorado tax was due, but we did claim the 2021 sales tax credit. It was denied because the return was filed late. Colorado would not recognize the federal extension. Is that correct? It seems very unfair as my client was out of town and could not file before April 18. Will that be true for 2022 as well? So let me answer the first part first. Those of you who are on Connect, the cocpa.org online community, either in the open forum or in the state sales tax, or excuse me, state tax forum, know that this has been a question and a lengthy thread in Connect. This is not associated with the result of Senate Bill 233. It is a nuance in the existing law. Many of you have responded on Connect about this being an incorrect interpretation. I will just let you know that we have reaffirmed it several times as late or most recently as yesterday morning with our colleagues at the Colorado Department of Revenue. So if you did not file that 21 return by April 18, but did claim the sales tax refund credit, it will be denied and the taxpayer will receive a notice denying it. I'm sorry. I wish the answer were different. However, the Department of Revenue is very clear about this, and it is a very intentional interpretation of what has been on the books since actually 2001. It's a nuance that hasn't really popped up until now because of the timing of 233. However, if that return were not filed by April 18, that sales tax refund on the return, the $74 or however much, because remember it's phased, right? There's 6 tiers, I think. It will be denied. If you haven't filed returns yet and you did claim that credit for the taxpayer, we understand that software does not allow you to zero that out. Software vendors have been alerted to this, but they're unlikely. In fact, you can pretty much be assured that they're not going to change their software programming for this now because it's over. They know, but they're not fixing it to keep that from being a part of the return as it's electronically processed and filed. It's unfortunate. I wish it were different. And it's the law. One of you actually asked the question about whether the society was going to get that fixed. We can't fix it now because the legislature has adjourned. It's certainly possible that the society might decide to address that in a future legislative session. However, I would just remind you that the timing is problematic. As I mentioned, the TABOR refund amount that's available for giving back, or that's required actually, for giving back to taxpayers, isn't even known until late summer or early fall, because it's based on the numbers at June 30, the end of the fiscal year. And then there has to be a certification process to make sure that the number is accurate. And then systems have to be programmed. And then it gets built into whatever the tier is, the tiers numbers are, as well as into the return for the following year. So in answer to the second part of this question, will that be true for 2022 as well? You can be assured that it will be true for 2022 because there's no opportunity to do anything about it before then. Whether it is addressed in a future year or not, I can't predict. What I would say is that it's unlikely that it will get changed just because of the timing problem. June 30 year end, certification by September 30, Colorado Department of Revenue receiving the information by October 1, programming of the system to be ready for the next year's worth of returns to be filed, an October 17 deadline or 15 deadline in those years when it's the usual October date is essentially impossible to achieve and know what the right numbers need to be. So while it certainly could be considered, it's unlikely. I wish I could tell you something different. Let's see. Okay. And the last question, what is the process for taxpayers who filed by April 18? Will the Department of Revenue send the dividend to taxpayers automatically? Yes, by check, as well as automatically for those who file by October 17, just at a different time. Okay, so I'm going to scroll up to the beginning of the chat after all the people saying hello. Thank you for that. And I'm just going to read them as they are posted here and answer them to the best of my ability. There may be some questions that we don't know the answers to yet, in which case we will find out what they are and we'll let you know. So Deborah writes, our tax software from a major provider is refusing to allow us to turn off the sales tax rebate for ineligible taxpayers, e.g. retirees with no Colorado taxable income and no withholding, because the 104 booklet does not list the restriction. Can you suggest the department update the 104 booklet to include this restriction after 4/15 for 2022? We can certainly suggest it, Deborah. I don't see that happening either, because frankly, it's over. As unfortunate as it is, we can certainly carry the message forward. We'll let you know what the answer is, but I think I'm pretty safe in saying it's unlikely that would happen. And even if it were possible and it were done, I think it's unlikely that your software provider is actually going to go back and reprogram for that now. It's easy to say, fix the instructions, right? It is not, well, and that's not necessarily even easy because, you know, it's out there in print and it's programming. But it is definitely not easy to expect that at this point, a software vendor is going to take care of this nuance just for Colorado. Sorry. Okay, Michael, I'm not sure if anyone else has noticed this, but Colorado has not accepted an e-filed return after May 15. Is this my tax program problem, or is this a Colorado program? Michael, this is the first time we've heard about this, so I don't know. But if you will do me a favor and send me an email with this question in it, I will immediately forward it to our colleagues at the Department of Revenue. The email address for me, Mary, M-A-R-Y, @cocpa.org. Rihanna writes that you've experienced the same circumstance. I can't tell you what's going on. I don't know, because this is the first we've heard about that. There should not be a problem with accepting e-filed returns. Obviously, they can be filed at any time up to and through October 17. There could be something happening right now that's just the first time I've heard about it. So let me check for you. Tim Bachicha wants to know how much whiskey can one purchase with $400? It depends on what kind of whiskey you decide to get. Shannon, I used Lacert and I filed 2 returns on 5/16 that have not been accepted yet. Again, we'll find out what the deal is about that. Thank you, Tim, for your comment about the governor. You all can read it in the chat. And Mike has just responded to Tim's question about the whiskey. And you're right, Mike, it does depend on how many bottles you buy, as well as how much each bottle costs. That's higher math for an English major like me. Is there a committee which decides how contributions to candidate races are allocated? Yes, there is. We have a CPA Political Action Committee board, and Pam Feely, as I mentioned, is the treasurer for the PAC. We consult with our colleagues who are well knowledgeable about the candidates. The first cut is, does the particular candidate, whether running for the first time or an incumbent, support business issues? That's number one, because people who are willing to talk about business related issues are people that the CPA profession wants to be able to talk with, right? We are not looking for people who have other social issues or particular other slices of the world of issues available out there. It is all about business issues. And then we take a look, along with our legislative counsel, Daniel Furman, who, along with members of the Colorado Chamber of Commerce, and Lauren Furman in particular, they interview the candidates. We look at the voter records in each district as well. So for example, there might be a wonderful candidate in District X, but where the voter registration is such that there is no way that individual is going to win. In that circumstance, we might still make a token contribution. And we might also make a post-election contribution to the individual who actually wins. So keep in mind that by statutory limitation, contributions to candidates cannot be more than $400 in a particular 2-year cycle. That's the max. So we're not talking about big contributions. The PAC might make a $100 contribution all the way up to a $400 contribution, but it's not big money. So while your contributions to the PAC make a lot of possible contributions for legislative candidates, we're not talking about huge influence financially. We are talking about awareness and access to people who care about business issues and are willing to talk with us. And we do contribute to both Republicans and Democrats, first-time candidates and incumbents. We also pay particular attention to the chair and vice chair of the Senate and House Finance Committees and the Senate and House Business Affairs and Technology Committees, because those generally are the committees which hear bills of concern and interest to the CPA profession. Great question, Michael. Again, what if the taxpayer was involved in the Marshall Fire area? So 2 parts to this. If the individual were involved in the Marshall Fire, has filed after April 18, or hasn't filed yet, he or she is still able to file and receive the Senate Bill 233 Tabor refund. That doesn't change. However, you'll remember that Marshall Fire victims were given the opportunity to extend to May 16. There was not enough time, literally, between the Marshall Fire and April 18 to reprogram the Department of Revenue system to be able to hold back a late filing notice. So anybody who files after April 18 affected by the Marshall Fire will likely receive a late filing notice from the department. However, the department has said and confirmed again for me yesterday that if your client receives one of those, you need to call the tax practitioner's helpline at the Department of Revenue. Jot this number down. And Tiffany, if you'll put it in the chat, I appreciate it as well. The practitioner's helpline number, 303-232-2419, with the taxpayer name and the Colorado account number, and that notice will be taken care of. Yes, I know that may mean that you have a bunch of them to do. The good news is they will not be penalized for filing after April 18, as long as they file by May 16. Or in this case, and that means they'll get that sales tax refund that's on the return, okay? They won't get a late filing penalty. So just keep that part in mind. All right, is zero tax liability determined before or after credits are applied? After. So you'll want to include all the modifications and credits on the return, Tim. You show the income, you show the modifications and credits. Buddy, I received a notice for a client who filed after 4/18 related to the sales tax refund and they had no tax liability, confirming the sales tax refund will only be disallowed if the taxpayer has no taxable income. You know, this is a slightly different question from how it's been asked before, Buddy. So will you do me a favor? Send it to me in an email, because that way I won't miss it. Mary@cocpa.org, and I will double check for you. Bruce, my buddy Bruce, the department cites CRS section 3922-2003, 5B, which provides that to be eligible for the sales tax refund, the return must be filed by April 15, or in this case, April 18 for this year. Thank you, Bruce, for the citation. That's the same citation that we included in the News Quick alert that was sent earlier this week. You can take a look at it. I know a lot of people think that Part A in that very section trumps Part B, but this is what the department is using to say, I'm sorry, but you had to file by that April deadline. Thank you, Elliot. Wow. You go to Costco and take your almost $30,000 with you, huh? All right. Now we have, let's see, 12 minutes still available. I do have a couple of other things I'm happy to touch on for you if you are done with questions, or if you'd like to just raise your hand or unmute yourself. I'll give you a moment to do that if you'd like to ask a question in real time. Please say who you are.
Mary, this is Deborah.
Hi, Deborah.
Could you just say again when the two batches of checks are expected to be mailed?
Sure. So if the return is filed by June 30, the checks are expected to be mailed by the end of the summer. So probably sometime in August, maybe early September. You know, summer goes long here. And if the return is filed by October 17, the checks are expected to be mailed in early 2023. So January-ish. It might take a little bit longer than that, but that's what you can let your clients know to expect, and watch for them.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions? Okay. And if you think of something else, go right ahead, as well as if you find another really expensive whiskey price, just, go ahead and post it in the chat. Shannon has written, just to be clear, in order to receive the sales tax refund on the return, the refund had to be filed by April 18, even if a valid extension was filed. That's correct. So remember that Tabor refunds are based on the fiscal year. The one that is on the return is for fiscal year 2020 through 2021. The one that is changed as a result of Senate Bill 233 is the Tabor refund. That's the check everybody will be getting. The Tabor refund based on state fiscal year 2021 to 2022. So through June 30 of this year. It is actually an advance refund. The governor's message about that was people need the money now because of the rising costs that they are dealing with. And so rather than hold on to the taxpayers' money for another 6 months, we're going to give it to you now. But it's not the same bucket of money that is a part of the refund opportunity on the 21 return. They are two different things. Okay, yes, Mary, everyone who is eligible will get a check, not a direct deposit. Let's see. Brianna, is there any reconciliation to be done to show this was received on the 2022 Colorado return? Thank you for asking that. You will not, and nor will your client, receive a 1099-G. This is a refund. And as far as we know, there will not be any reconciliation or deduction for 2022. Lance writes, if a person does not file a tax return but does receive the heat or property tax rebate, does that person still receive the Tabor refund? Yes. And Elliot, they also stated in the hearings that the state of Colorado will lose $30 to $40 million in interest on the money refunded early. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I don't know, Elliot, if that number is correct. It could be. It's math, right? But it also depends on what's happening in the markets and how the state invests those funds. So yes, they are giving the money back early. Yes, they are foregoing some kind of interest that would have been earned on it. I imagine at some point along the way, there will be press on that too, because it will be one of those look at what we did for you moments that most people probably would want to take advantage, especially if you happen to be the governor and you're running for re-election. That's not a political statement, it's just the reality. Okay, let's go to the slide, Tiffany, after this one. Since we have a little bit of time, I do want to touch on a couple of other bills that came through the process this year. First, I'm sure that you have already been hearing about or thinking about or wondering what in the world to do about Senate Bill 22-124, the Salt Parity Act, that actually amended the Salt Parity Act that was passed in the last legislative session. So Bruce Nelson, you are here with me, and if I don't say this well, I invite you to say it better. What we heard from the department yesterday, wait. Do not try to do anything about those returns that allow you to go back to 2018 for S corps and partnerships now. The plan and the reason why the bill was amended to provide for the department to go all the way to September 2023 to be able to figure out how to do this was so that the department could develop one simple composite form that will be released by September 23 to cover the 4 years, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, to allow for the calculation to pay one big tax payment, and then the department will handle the refunds to the individual partners. So this is a wait until there is guidance. There will be guidance. There will be, the department is committed to a single composite form to make it as streamlined as possible, as efficient as possible to do this work for those who want to take advantage of that new version of the Colorado Salt Parity Act. Bruce, is there anything you'd like to add?
They did mention that The election, they thought, should be made by the end of this year,
Yes.
rather than, even though it says the election will be made on the form, they seem to indicate that no, it should be made by the end of the year.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it was on the estimated tax payment form. Is that right?
Right. The 106 ET. DR
Yes.
106 ET. Are you proud of me? I remembered that part. Uh, you will still be able to make the election on the form itself come next year, but if you can make it before December 31 of 2022, that would be wise to do.
Mary, I have
Yep.
a question.
Yep.
Elliot Gadan. If the election is made on the return next year and the client paid no estimated taxes during 22/4/22, I'm assuming there'll be an underestimation penalty, but the fact that you did not pay estimates will not preclude you from using the PTE rules, right?
You have just asked the stump the speaker question, Elliot. I do not know the answer to that. Bruce might know the answer to that. However, Bruce was very clear yesterday with me saying, don't ask me to teach this. And that's because there's still lots of figuring out about how this is going to work. So I don't know. However, we are talking with several people about developing a webcast on how this is all going to work, which we probably will do with the department so that you have the folks who actually know the answer. And Bruce, yeah, I think you need to go back and mute yourself because we're getting an echo. Thank you. So I can't answer it today, Elliot, but we will be able to answer it. I don't know yet how quickly. Thank you for asking it nonetheless. And finally, I'd like to just give you the heads up in case you, for some reason, have a purpose to know about House Bill 22-1118. That has to do with filing a claim for refund of overpaid sales tax. This was a hotly discussed and amended bill early in the legislative session this year because there were lots of concerns about how it originally was written. Including the fact that there was a reference to what would be considered a frivolous claim for sales tax refund. And so while frivolous has been removed, there are other aspects of that bill that still continue to be frustrating, especially for CPA firms and CPAs who file these claims appropriately, where large sums of overpaid sales tax are involved. So just have that in the back of your head as a heads up that there are now some new restrictions around what the department is required to do and when the department is required to pay interest if a claim is not complete or if the claim takes longer than a particular length of time to be able to process. This has been driven primarily because there are now some companies out there that go about the country offering to file these kinds of claims without them actually being valid or complete. And it is creating huge processing challenges for the Department of Revenue to get through them and either refund the money or deny them. So I just wanted to put that on your radar in case that's a subject that you'll want to be aware of for a client, either currently or in the future. Okay, let's see. We are at 9:59, and thank you, Branka, very much for your comment. I can't say it often enough. When we ask, you deliver, and when you deliver, Colorado citizens benefit. So thank you for all you always do on behalf of all those folks out there who need your help. Thank you for being members of the Colorado Society of CPAs, and thank you for participating in the process. You really do make a difference. Whether it's great sausage, a ribeye, or a wonderful kebab of fabulous seafood, we are privileged to work with you. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.